me just move this blank here so I can access the questions. So we got a handful of questions here, and I've gone through them, but then since then, one or two more were added, so we'll have some surprises as well. We'll try to have some questions that we go through fairly quickly, rapid fire style. Dad always likes to say you get 1 minute, which sometimes means a minute and sometimes means more than a minute. And there were definitely some common threads to some of these questions, so if I don't ask the exact question that you wrote down, hopefully we'll get to a question that is worded in a similar way to what you were thinking. Let's start with this one. And Chris, start with you. How would you advise parents of a Christian, classically educated student if they plan to send that student to public school to be salt and light, to use the term the questioner asked? So let's start with Chris on that one. You have 30 seconds.
Okay, that would be like 1 out of 1,000 students who probably prepared to be salt and light in this cultural moment. We do not send our kids to. Education is not mission work, and we need to sharpen and prepare our kids for that time when they can. I'm not opposed to adults going in to be teachers in these schools, but we should be very careful about this matter. I know there are some exceptions. I hear, for example, in Mississippi that a lot of the schools there are just populated with lots of Christian teachers and administrators, and the schools there might be exceptional in terms of what you would find. But more and more, I think the rule applies that these schools are highly secular and secularizing, and that our students are statistically generally getting eaten by lions. That's what's happened. So the question I would say, give to that parent is, why will your son or daughter be any different when 70 to 80% of the students who do go leave church attendance and faith, usually by the time they're in college? If you don't know about the statistics, it's been well documented, very well documented. Christian Smith at Notre Dame, Souls in Transition, Emerging Adults, his studies have just shown. So we have a big crisis on our hands where kids in evangelical churches and other kinds of churches go off to a secular college and leave their faith. It's a serious matter. We are called to forming our kids in the love of Christ, forming their souls, Ephesians 6. And it's just getting more and more problematic to do that in most public schools. So, no, they're not missionaries yet. They're to be students. They're to be formed. They're to be mentored and discipled.
Go ahead. Did you want to add something, Dad?
Well, I would ask what they mean by salt and light. I think most people, when they hear the word salt, they think it's some cool thing that makes meat taste better, and light is radiance or something. Salt is what you pour on a sacrifice. Light burns, right? These are temple terms. These are sacrifice terms and candle, oil lamp terms. So if you're sending your kids to get burned and consumed, okay, go for it. If they're going to be martyrs, go for it. Are you ready to watch your children suffer? Are you ready to watch them be crucified? If you've equipped them for that, and you're ready for that, then send them. But if you think they're going to walk in there and persuade people who don't even have categories and questions and analogies that open up reality to them, and they're going to walk in there and save these high school kids or teachers, I would encourage you to examine your assumptions.
Heidi or Matt, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just one thing. David Hicks says in Norms of Nobility that divine eros between teacher and student is the source of virtue and learning. We talked about this in a colloquy with some of you yesterday. And that core relationship that builds and forms the soul is teacher and student. And so it matters a lot who your children's teachers are. And to have a child with a deep love for their teacher, all children, especially the younger kids, have like a deep love for their teachers, right? And so if you send them to a place where that teacher cannot be trusted to instill the wisdom and virtue that we are believing in and clinging to and desiring to form our kids, that's a wound on your child's soul. To love somebody all day and then to come home and have mom and dad say, you can't believe that. Right? So that core relationship has to be protected and nurtured and nourished, and that is our responsibility as parents. So that is another thing to think through when you're talking about sending your kids into a secular environment.
Hey, Wes Callahan.
Hey, Wes,
Dad just whispered in my ear, would you take the spot up here?
we have an empty seat. Will you come join us? Wes,
We need a beard. We need a beard on the stage.
we need some quality up here.
I thought he was going to complain about something when he whispered in my ear, and then he had a good idea. It's unusual.
You reached your quota for the day, Andrew.
Yeah. So this is a question that I think we should maybe address quickly. Matt, I want to ask you this first. It's related to the previous question. What age, if ever, should a Christian classical school student be given a smartphone or allowed on social media?
Good luck.
I thought you'd like this one.
I love you so much right now. I don't know. What does Josh Gibbs say? I have no idea. I don't know. I can't answer that question. You know what I know? Here's what I know. I know nothing. That's what I know.
I think that you should watch The Social Dilemma, that documentary, if you haven't seen it already. It'll be helpful for anyone who wants to address these questions. And I think I regret giving my children smartphones, after 2008 when the iPhone came out. Didn't foresee just how powerful it would be in terms of shaping souls. But I think you can go to the light phone now. There are some options. The talk and text phone, the light phone. My son just went to the light phone because he didn't want to be distracted by anything else. You can't put apps on it. There's no browser access. You can't send photos. But it's a good phone, and it's talk and text. And so you get a lot of what you want with your teenager. They can be in touch with you. You can follow them around. You can feel like they're in contact. Or you could try to take a smartphone and turn it into a dumb phone with coding, with a special code and so on. But then, of course, there's a challenge with that. The kids will likely want to unlock that pretty soon.
Heidi, you have teenagers right now, so.
I do, and this is a big question, and that's why I didn't rush to answer, because I'm in the same dilemma as many of you as parents, because there's, I think it, and I hesitate to speak directly into some kind of moral law about such a powerful tool. As Chris said, I think that as they head into their teenage years, I'm learning as with my own kids, and actually everybody up here has way more experience than me with teenagers, but as a mom, I'm thinking about those kinds of big decisions from a perspective of wisdom and virtue, right? Not a perspective of pure practicality. But what is it how can this form my child's soul? And what do I need it for, right? Like how would this benefit them, and what is the risk? And for every family, it is going to be an individual decision, but it has to be made through the perspective of the formation of the soul, through wisdom and virtue, and through, I think, even the question of glory, right? What are our children beholding? And how is that taking their souls and moving them from glory to glory? And so technology isn't something to be disdained, but it is so dangerous that it has to be, the decision, those kinds of decisions cannot be made just because you want to know where they are, right? Be able to get a hold of them at all times.
I just would add that, look at your own soul too. Right. What has the phone done to you? And what are you modeling? because it's going to be very difficult to ask your teenagers not to do something that you are also doing. They see you distracted by your phone and so forth. I would just encourage you again to watch The Social Dilemma. How many of you have seen that film?
Agreed.
Okay, so the rest of you, I think it's available as a documentary on Netflix. It'll open your eyes to this. I'd also recommend The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch is another book that many people have benefited from regarding this decision.
Wes, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I'd like to amen what Chris just said. Think long and hard about your own relationship to your smartphone. I've had a smartphone ever since they came out, and I've been damaged by it. I know I have, in my mind and my soul. And as careful as I like to think that I am sometimes, it's increased temptations. It's increased. It's dumbed me down. It's done all kinds of things. And as Chris said, what we do models for our youngsters what we what they see us doing. Also, if we don't think hard and long about this and do something about it, we're going to find ourselves behind them, because there actually has been for quite some time a movement among young people, the millennials and so on, to do exactly this, to be more careful and to back away. Some of them are ahead of us. So look for that movement and see what they're doing. And there is, as Chris said, there are technological innovations to go back and help us avoid some of this damage.
Yeah, on the Light Phone website, their tagline is something like, "We want our humanity back." And these phones have been, another tagline is, "A phone designed to be used as little as possible." And these phones were designed by Silicon Valley executives who wanted their humanity back.
So, was anyone else? I can't see Matt. Did you decide you wanted to talk? So now that we had that nice, easy question out of the way, I want to, do just a slightly easier one. What is this timeless sine qua non of classical education? I.e., what is a mere classical education? Matt, you want to take that one first too?
Homer.
All right, great. But specifically the Iliad, right? Right, yeah.
It's Jesus.
Okay, you win.
Sure looks like a squirrel, but
Thank you.
Matt, do you want to answer this one? Yeah.
Wes already did. So did Andrew. I don't know. I mean, that's the answer, isn't it? It's what Lewis says, to do fewer things weller and not more things less well, or whatever. You guys know the Lewis quote. I can just say it, right? I mean, I can just point to it and you know what I'm talking about. That thing that he said, that's it, right? I don't know. I think we're trying to do too much. We don't even, realize how distracted we are by and drawn away towards, false objectives and false purposes and false goals with our education. And then we want to take that, right, and we want to chase after GPAs and test scores and college entrance and whatever. And then we want to still do all of that, but then we want to do it with a classical education. But I don't know. I think we just need to set all that stuff aside, stop pretending that that's what's important, and just pursue cultivating wisdom and virtue. And then we can do that by doing fewer things weller. And I might be thinking about bourbon right now too also. Weller. But anyways, we just need to do a few things well and focus on that. And that really is Homer and Jesus.
May
and
I
Euclid.
follow up on that? I agree absolutely, and I think if I could assume what's behind the question, the sine qua non, the basic of classical education, is history and literature. And the reason I say that is because you study let's say history and the great books that record history. And that's because if you study history, you're gaining perspective. When you look at a map, not a GPS, but when you look at a map, you can see your relationship to the other things around you. When you look at an analog watch, one with hands, you can see a relationship in time to other points in time. And when you study history, you're doing the same thing. Imagine drawing a timeline on a whiteboard in front of a classroom of students, and you say, here we are, here's where Shakespeare was, here's Julius Caesar, here's Jesus Christ, here's Moses. They see where they are in relationship to the rest of history. And what you're doing is giving them perspective, like helping them to climb up to the top of a tall hill or a high tree and look and see the layout of the land around them. When you have perspective, when your students are given perspective, then they have the beginning of wisdom. They see what their relationship is to the rest of space and time. So that's not all there is to wisdom, but it's a significant step, understanding their perspective to the world around. Otherwise, they live their lives like they're down in a hole with the surface of this well 6 inches or 6 feet away from them, and they see nothing of the world around. And they are all that is there, and so they think that we're born. Infants and children are born thinking that they're God, that they're center of the universe, and it's natural. But the job of education is to teach children that they're not God. That's the purpose of education.
To turn cats into dogs, is that what you're saying?
To turn cheese into mystics.
So perspective teaches that, and I think that's what the study of history and the great books of history does. And then everything else will fall naturally into it.
I sort of agree with that. I mean, I do agree with that. I liked very much the way you used the word you talked about analog maps. I like that a lot because I like the word analog a lot. I would contend that history and literature are analogical extensions of what's sine qua non, they are the sine qua non, although I'm not exactly sure like if there's one sine qua non we're looking for or a bunch of them. But history and literature are the analogical extensions, but I don't think it's going to be sufficiently classical without the mathematical analogs. And so I think then even more important than the analogs is what the analogs come from, and that's the Logos. So if we were going to combine Homer with Jesus, as we talked about before, and if we were going to combine the mathematical with the historical and literary and so on, I think what holds it all together is Logos. And if there's one thing that makes classical, it's the search for the Logos. And if there's one thing that makes Christian, it's the revelation of the Logos. And so in that sense, Logos and analogos are very dialogosical.
I also think if I were asking this question, I might also be wondering, what do I have to teach my students in order to say that it was classical, right? And if that's the question behind the question, I think that we're talking about great books, source texts, not textbooks, right? The books, appropriate developmentally throughout time. So like kindergartners, they need to be reading fairy tales and Bible and poetry and, right, children's Homer, these kinds of things as they get a little older. And then once they're in the secondary school, they need to be reading primary texts, right? They could read Plato's Republic with a teacher and a guide. They can read Aristotle's Ethics, all three epics. They can read the medievals all the way up through the moderns, right? And so the later years build on the earlier years, right? So have them read the ancients when they're first in like the 9th grade kind of time frame, right? Then the medievals and they make connections, and then the early moderns and they make connections, right? So those source texts, math, because the world is an ordered place and we have the capacity to understand and harmonize that order, so we need to be doing that, right? Latin and logic are important components of a mere classical education because they train the mind to think about the elegance of language and rhetoric, then to be able to use language well. And so those things are necessary for a classical education because of the things that Andrew and Wes were talking about, because those are the practices then that embody the Logos.
So sometimes when people ask this question, of course, we don't know who the questioner is, but they're looking for, like, what are the essentials that I must do? And is there a simple way of describing something that's very complex? It's akin to someone asking who knows nothing about the Christian faith, what does it mean to be a follower of Christ? How do you answer that question? You can give a very simple answer, or you could just go on forever.
Right.
So how do you simplify something that's complex, especially if you're trying to share it with your sister-in-law at Thanksgiving, and you only got 30 seconds before her eyes will glaze over. So, you have to look for various ways of defining it, and it is difficult. And sometimes we use metaphors to describe things that are complex. So sometimes I'll say it's like a cathedral, or it's like a feasting table, or it's like a grand museum that we're exploring. Sometimes I like Martin Cawthorn's really good at this. Nice simple answers. He once, in a fit of frustration, said, "It's the liberal arts and the great books." And that's maybe the tip of the iceberg, and then you can go deeper from there. What are the liberal arts? And Heidi did a nice job of just describing that. History and literature. Of course, the Logos is behind everything. So I think this is almost a definitional question. There are a number of ways you can define something. So I like often starting, depending on who the person is, by saying it's the liberal arts and the natural sciences and the great books. And then just stop, and usually someone asks the question, well, what are the liberal arts? And what are the great books? And we start talking about what Wes was speaking of. And then if someone wants to know what's behind this, we go to the Logos, because it's all coming from Christ. So these are important questions. And they can be answered in a lot of different ways. And it's often those of you who have been at this for about 3 or 4 years who start asking this question again. So wait a minute, how else can I talk about this?
But of course, the sine qua non is that you have to come to the CiRCE conference.
Moving on. So there was, the sciences just came up in their answers, and there were 3 questions related to this, 3 kind of different ways of expressing this question. One said, I understand the liberal arts and the great books are a big deal, but can anyone speak to science? Where does it fit into all of this? Somebody else says, there's a clear vision for the humanities in the great books in the Western tradition, but math is conspicuously missing. I assume they mean here at the conference. To me, it's overwhelmingly absent. Why do we not discuss or wrestle with this? And then another person said, we seem to be well on the road to mastering what it means and how we are to teach Christianly and classically within the humanities, but our math and sciences are still in the back seat. Ravi Jain and Kevin Clark have nudged us in the right direction, but when will we turn to this path and send out explorers into these frontiers so that we may begin to settle these territories as we are clearly doing in the humanities? Last night's performance represents the dominion we are beginning to have in the trivium, but how can we begin to do the same in the quadrivium? So math and science conspicuously, overwhelmingly perhaps absent. How do we teach Christianly and classically within the math and the sciences as we do within the humanities? Matt, you lean forward. And I'm just going to keep tossing it to you first.
I did this to myself. Well, so I recently started working on this classified cosmology project. And then I've started hearing Andrew talking about that he was working on a cosmology project. He might have stolen it from me. I'm just kidding. I'll let him talk about that. But what's funny is that I don't think you all want us to do math classically. I think you really just want us to do literature and history classically in the humanities. I mean, I gave a talk at a conference on it was very practically and clearly called How to Teach Math Classically. 2 people showed up. So I don't know. I mean, do you guys really want us to talk about it? It doesn't seem like it. I don't know. Now, I mean, notice there, though, that I'm blaming you guys for not coming, not me. Like maybe they don't want to hear me talk about teaching math classically. Also a possibility, but I don't. I wonder about this a lot actually, because I think it's a good question, because I've wondered why did we go down the humanities path first? Like, if we were going to pick one of the two, the trivium or the quadrivium, which one is it, right? And why would we pick the trivium over the quadrivium? And I mean, obviously, Dorothy Sayers made that choice for a lot of us being influenced by her. So she did that, but why did she do that? And then why did we just go along with that? Just go along with that. And I think it's probably because words were more under attack, right? And that's what we needed to save. The deconstructionists and whatnot were attacking language and the nature of language and the nature of communication and all those things, right? And so then that was what was under attack, and then Christians needed to save it, right? We needed to get out there and protect it. So we said, well, that's what we're going to focus on first with this whole, revivification of classical education. But math felt safe, right? Because 3 is 3. What are you going to do with that? Challenge accepted. Yeah, because look where we are today, right? Even math is under attack now, right? So now it's a good question, right? Because now we can't mess around anymore, right? It's under attack, and we've got to do something. So, when my middle son was taking geometry, I have no idea what geometry program we bought him. It was not Euclid, but we just bought him this digital online geometry program, and I don't remember what the definition of a point was, but there was a definition of a point, and it was not Euclid's definition of a point. And it was a very materialistic definition of a point. And my son, apparently he had divine arrows for that teacher, because when I tried to tell him that guy was wrong, he would not accept it. He was like, no, that guy's a math teacher, you're you. So, we argued about Euclid and that guy and the definition of a point, but somehow this guy was turning math into a very materialistic study. And it's not. I mean, mathematics is like, for me, mathematics is like the bridge between, this kind of physical and the spiritual, right? Like, it forces you, like, you can be completely materialistic, and when you start dealing with points and lines and triangles and circles and squares and oh my's, you can't ignore the fact that you're dealing with spiritual realities, like with things that don't have parts or thickness or breadth,
And we never find in this world in a perfect state.
that you can never find. Yeah, exactly. That you can never find in this world. There's a story I've told a lot, but my oldest son was at college, and he was at a Great Books program. And they were reading the Iliad. They're reading Homer and Plato and Aristotle, and all freshman year, and all the kids in his class are kind of mocking the quaintness of these ancient Greeks and their belief in this thing called a soul. And then he noticed by the end of the year that these same students who were mocking and ridiculing the Greeks for their belief in the soul had begun talking about the soul as if it were real. But there was no point during freshman classes where they were discussing Plato's arguments or Homer's arguments or Aristotle's arguments. One, because they don't really make them, they just kind of assume it. They talk about it, they describe the soul, but they don't really offer proofs for the soul. That's not completely true, but anyways, the students were not reading those texts, and so he was trying to figure out what was it that caused them to go from not believing in the soul to believing in the soul. These students who are just straight up empiricists and naturalists, and the other thing too is that there wasn't this one moment where they encountered the argument and converted. It was this slow thing where they made fun of it, stopped making fun of it, started talking about it, and then believed in it. And there was no point where they even realized that they had changed. And then he realized, we had some conversations about it, and he realized that it was Euclid. Because at the same time that they were reading Homer and Plato and Aristotle, they were also learning Euclid, and that these people who didn't believe that there was any such thing that's not physical had been playing with points and lines and triangles and circles all year, things that were not physical, except for only when they're symbolically represented. And it was Euclid, this bridge between the physical and the spiritual that the geometry is, that saved these kids,
Here's something you won't appreciate if you're a science person. Between 1550 and 1700, the classical tradition was destroyed and routed by the scientists and the mathematicians. There is an open wound in the classical tradition that the scientists keep ripping open again. And you can't then come back to us and say, why aren't you making us your king? Or why aren't you welcoming us to the party? Stop shooting us, and we might let you in. That's me in a bad mood. Okay, now let me express what I mean here. In the 16th and 17th century, it was in the realm of astronomy, primarily, and in the realm of music, secondarily, and in the realm of geometry, that the classical tradition was routed. And how was that done? Number one, the Copernican revolution was understood not only to correct Ptolemy's astronomical patterns, but his entire aesthetic and ethical. They didn't have worldviews in those days, they had cosmologies. Okay? Worldviews is what you have in an age dominated by the sciences, who don't like to keep their place since then, by the way. They're brats. Sorry. Am I getting in a mood again?
Should I stop him or?
So astronomy is shaken up by Copernicus. When we get to Newton, Newton makes a shift in thought that is the linchpin of modern education and the Enlightenment, and this is it. It's very simple. He stops treating astronomy as the study of celestial harmonies and instead treats astronomy as the study of celestial mechanics. Do you see the difference? You don't have the sons of God singing at the creation anymore. You have engineers making watches and clocks. And that gives us the divine watchmaker. It's a cosmological shift led by astronomers. And until astronomers repent of that, they're going to have to take a smaller seat at the table. Second, with geometry, the shift that Matt's talking about from Euclidean to modern geometry. Think of it this way, okay? Astronomy is the study of celestial harmonies in the tradition. Geometry is the study of terrestrial harmonies. Okay? It becomes, with Descartes, an analytical geometry, which is what they called algebra at the time. It becomes the study of terrestrial mechanics. And understand that when we talk about reason, okay, in the tradition, in the classical tradition, reason has 7 colors in its garment. It's the rainbow, right? It has 7 colors, 7 modes of perception, one of which is musical. And the musical perceptions that you gain on reality can't be put in words. They can be felt in the soul, they can be calculated, they can be represented in mathematical formulas, but the fact that you can't put them in words doesn't mean they're not true. That's why music is a doorway between the physical and the spiritual world. That's why you feel music so deeply. That's why you obey music so promptly. That's why it orders and disorders your soul. Because it's either ordered to something that is a celestial harmony, or it's ordered to something else. Okay? So, when we go through the 17th century, we watch astronomy, harmonics or music, and geometry, all of them massively reduced and subjected to a modern version of reason, which basically amounts to geometrical thought. That and combined with experimentation. If I can start with my axioms and prove from my axioms that something is true, I'm functioning rationally. My axiom is that there's only a material realm, so if I'm going to be functioning rationally, I only can function within the material realm. Anything that music teaches me, that's just sentimental. That's just emotional. Anything that celestial harmonies teach me, that's just coincidence. Right? Any qualitative value of number, that's just numerology. That's just superstition. all of that is dismissed, and we live in this massively reduced mode of thinking. And understand, let me say it again, with all the gentleness and kindness I can muster up. It's because of the freaking sciences who lost their way so far that instead of calling themselves natural philosophers, they arrogated to themselves the term scientists. A science is a mode of knowing. What they're telling us is there's really only one mode of knowing. Okay, now, I absolutely love science. That's why I have this cosmology project in mind. And when I was a child, and I took his cosmology project in mind, when I was a child and took the standardized test, I scored way up top on the natural sciences, and I was way down here on English. Okay, my gifts and my talents and my loves are all on this dimension, and for whatever reason, the Lord has not allowed that to develop. One way was he got me in a car accident, which messed up my algebra. But I could sit and play around with numbers and even make practical applications if you forced it, day and night. I love numbers. I hear numbers sing. I dance with numbers. That's what I want to teach students how to do. But I'm not going to worship them. And I'm going to demand, because I love them so much, I'm going to demand that they take their place. Okay? Because if they take their place as servants instead of kings, they will be exalted. Do you understand? By exalting themselves, they have not only harmed the whole world that be mixed here. They have blessed us in so many ways, because it's never just been arrogant people exalting themselves. But they have got too full of themselves. They've demanded too much authority. They've made too large claims. And if they'll just humble themselves and sit at the table or serve the table, they will be exalted to the temple of God. Okay, that's my problem with the sciences. I love them and I want them healed, but they are committing suicide. So stop shooting us, stop cutting us up with your swords, and we'll let you sit at the table more comfortably.
Before I let Wes or Chris talk, I want to share my favorite movie
Correct
quote,
me, yeah.
which was written by Graham Greene for The Third Man, where Orson Welles' character says, "In Italy for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed. But they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace and science. And what did they produce? The cuckoo clock."
I like Google
Wes, go ahead.
I was going to suggest that this is a supremely important topic.
Yeah, it is.
And one of the beginning steps to restoring culture, or however you want to phrase what we're trying to do in situations like this, is to understand how far Western civilization has fallen, or what C.S. Lewis called Old Western culture has fallen. If you read, so if you're interested, and you should be, I wanted to offer just some beginning steps in reading to kind of help you get up to speed. Start with C.S. Lewis's essay called On the Description of Times, or De Descriptione Temporum, which was his inaugural lecture when he moved from Oxford University to Cambridge University. It's an essay that's, it literally was the beginning, the foundation of the shaping of my understanding of what history is and where we are many decades ago. Read that essay. Secondly, many of you have probably heard of Alistair McIntyre's book, After Virtue. I think it's on the 8th Day Books table back there. If nothing else, read the first 2 pages. I'm serious. Read the first 2 pages, and that will give you an imaginative picture of what many people, including us, understand to be happening in Western civilization. Just read the first 2 pages. Read the rest of the book, but you'll begin to have your imagination come on board if you read those. Secondly, there's a modern author named Charles Taylor. I can't remember the title of the book. It's on the development of the idea.
Secular Age.
There you go. So The Secular Age. That's a very good book too. Fourth, there's a gentleman who lives in the west of Ireland who became a Christian just within the last year or two, but for a long time has been a novelist and is what I think is he's a profound thinker, and he has a Substack newsletter that you can subscribe to. His name is Paul Kingsnorth, and he's doing a lot of thinking about this whole topic. And in the course of his thinking and the contemplative essays he's writing in his newsletter, I think it costs $5 a month to subscribe to, and it is immensely worth it. You can have access to some of his reflections even without subscribing, but I highly recommend it. But he also includes some, books and suggestions on further reading about how he's coming to these conclusions. So read Lewis's essay on the description of times. Read the first 2 pages of After Virtue, but buy the book and read the whole thing. It's a tremendous book. I think it's a seminal work in the second half of the 20th century. Read Charles Taylor on the Secular Age, and subscribe to Paul Kingsnorth. You won't agree with everything any of these people say, but you will probably find yourself forced to agree with the vast majority of it, and certainly the burden of it, which is the broad landscape for the kind of things that Andrew and the others have been talking about here. So there's some reading suggestions.
I have to add one other comment really quick, sorry. The term humanities was coined by Cicero, and he listed a number of arts that made up the humanities. 4 of them were arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. So the term humanities, as it's used today, is another victim of the sciences separating themselves from the humanities, not the humanities separating themselves from the sciences.
Yes, and thank you for that. The word mathematics comes from a Greek word, mathmateo, and the noun mathmates, I believe, is the word for disciple. The disciples of Christ were mathmatois. Thank you. There's a Greek speaker in the back. And so it means learner. It means to be a learner. Some other books that might be of help to you by some Christian mathematicians. One is James Nichol, God is, why math? Thank you, Mathematics is God Silent. And then John Byle, The Divine Challenge. Both of these books are thoughtful books by well-educated mathematicians, and they will give you a great history of mathematics that will be helpful in their reflecting on it as believers. Another book that might be is worth reading, but I think I would be interested in Andrew's critique of it now that he's been doing this cosmological study, is a book not by a Christian as far as I know, by Philip Lockhart, called A Mathematician's Lament. You can get a PDF version of this, but he subjects mathematical teaching to a pretty scathing criticism. He's very critical of mathematical texts. He thinks they're like cookbooks with recipes, and they're just kind of mindless repetition without really teaching the structures and ideas that are represented in mathematical thinking. And then he has a book called Measurement, which is his attempt to try to create some kind of a book that would lead into, that's kind of a non-text text that would lead to mathematical learning. They're worth learning, reading. Can I just see a show of hands? How many of you have a science or mathematics major from college? Okay, another problem we have is that most of us who went to college and took a specialized degree, and we don't have a very well integrated education. We had to choose, and that's actually a new phenomenon in education. It's only about 100 years old. If you went to, say, Harvard in the 1850s, you would go through the same curriculum that every student went through. It would be a liberal education. So the elective system has caused some of the problems we're experiencing too. So when a school or homeschooling co-op is looking for a teacher to teach, say, biology or chemistry, usually that's someone who maybe did a chemistry major, a biology major, they haven't had an integrated mathematical, scientific, and liberal education, generally speaking. And so we have this kind of siloed effect where the chemistry teacher comes in and teaches chemistry the way he was taught in college, can't really relate it to the other aspects of the curriculum or the great conversation, the great books. It's just a reflection. It's not our fault, but it's a reflection of our own poor educations. So until we have Magister Artium again, Master of the Arts, all 7 of the arts, we aren't going to have the integrated discussion about mathematics and science that we used to have. So I think those of you who have students going off to college, why do you let them think in terms of the elective system? They should not be going in thinking, I should choose a major. This is a part of something we've inherited from the progressives. So a lot of classically educated students are now saying, I need to do a double major. I want to study nursing, which is a professional job training curriculum. It's a common art, and philosophy, or I want to do engineering and literature. But here's the problem. If you want to do a double major as an engineer or computer scientist and also do literature and philosophy in your typical college, can you do it in 4 years and keep your scholarship? No, even if you wanted to say, I'll do this in 5 years because I want to study both of these disciplines, you lose your scholarship after the end of your 8th semester. So we have to fight against this and break this as well, because here we are educating our children classically, wanting them to become a master of all 7 of the arts and enter into the great conversation, and then they go off to college and they are interested in chemistry, and well, that's all they're going to be able to do. Or they're interested in computer science, Dietrich, and that's all you're going to be. Well, he's at Grove City where they do make him do other stuff. But you see the concern. So maybe you ought to plan for a 5-year schedule so your students can get a more well-rounded liberal education.
I would also, Greg, would you stand up? Greg Wilbur at New College Franklin, they actually focus very hard on the quadrivium as liberal arts, and they're doing extraordinary things. So look at their college for your kids.
I'm sure we have more to say. Should we do follow-up, or should we keep going? Yeah.
I promise to
Is
keep
it
it
about
short,
Homer?
David. I just wanted to not correct what Andrew said, but tweak it.
I dare you.
The big picture problem we see in the collapse of Western civilization, and it's genuinely been a collapse. We no longer live in Western civilization or old Western culture. We're past the end. We're in the ruins. But the problem is not science and math, although Andrew is right to blast at the sciences. But the problem with the sciences and the mathematics in the past centuries is not with the scientists as scientists, but the scientists insofar as they attempted to be philosophers as well and thought badly about what the sciences are doing. But that's because the liberal arts and philosophy failed first and opened the door for bad thinkers in other areas to do their damage. So I think, if for example, if you read things like Richard Weaver's Ideas Have Consequences, been around since the 40s, everybody should read it. Just read the introduction and you'll get the picture there. Again, introductions are often so good. But because the liberal arts and philosophy failed, and I'll include theology and philosophy here, the sciences and mathematics went unguarded, and the liberal arts and philosophy should be the guardians and the guides of the mathematical and other hard sciences and so on. So that's one reason why there's a focus in places like CiRCE and other classical education conferences on the liberal arts, because the master fell and became a demon. We're trying to reverse that, and then when that happens, then these other things will fall into place.
Oh, I thought he was gonna.
I am content.
Okay, all right. Okay, so this question came up, a couple different forms of it. Let's see. We'll do this one. What is the point in teaching our students to see God's glory in a world that is evil and, according to Revelation, going nowhere? It also says here, how are we as students to train our how are we as teachers, rather, to train our students to take dominion of a world that seems to be falling apart or, quote, going to hell?
Huh. It's falling apart because we're not taking dominion, though.
Go on.
That's a complete.
Well, don't ask. Don't.
You're making reference. The questioner is making reference to an eschatology, it seems to me, and I think we learned from Scripture that the gates of hell will not prevail against the kingdom, but there are epochs and there are times, and Pope Benedict said in one place, according to a friend of mine, that he said that in every era we're either in an era that resembles the apostolic era or one that is a kind of Christendom. And in the apostolic era, you didn't see dominion, you saw persecution, you saw great turmoil. You Paul saying things like, if you're a slave, and yet there's this also announced there's also this announced hope. At any rate, what is the eschatology of the questioner? Because if you're a premillennial, pre-trib believer in the rapture, yes, everything's going to burn. Why would we even do this? Let's just hang on and save as many souls as we can. It can lead to a kind of quietism and a reference only to evangelism, but not to discipleship and not to culture building. If you are a post-millennialist, you may believe that we're going to win, and we're going to win at any time, and that the castles are going to fall, and we're going to charge in, and we're going to be bringing in the millennial reign, and there will be great glory, and the glory of God will cover the earth as the earth covers as the waters cover the sea. But if you're an Augustinian, you would say it's going to be the wheat and the tares are going to grow up together, and there always will be times of conflict. There will be the city of God and the city of man, and we will experience times of refreshment and times of great growth, and we should always be hopeful and optimistic, but we also should be realistic that there will be opposition, and this may be another era of opposition and persecution and suffering. If God wills that, should we not accept it for the time, knowing that he will do and accomplish his purposes? If the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, would we not be willing to shed our own blood for the sake of the growth of the kingdom? So I think eschatology is important here. And the church has never fully agreed on eschatology, and one's eschatology does seem to, inform how people talk about what education is going to be and how we go about doing it. I wonder if the panel has any other comments about that.
Yeah, I mean, Holy Scripture teaches us that when God created the world, he made it good. And the church fathers wrote much about the journey or the pilgrimage of the Christian life being a return, right? A return home. It is in many ways a homecoming journey. And the medievals taught that the pilgrimage of the Christian life is to be made fit for heaven, right? We are moving toward a place, a restoration of our home, of our homeland. And that needs to be prepared, right? Prepared within the hearts of ourselves, of our children, of our schools, of our communities, right? It's a work worth doing, whether it's, as you pointed out with eschatology, Chris, I think that's such a good distinction here. But whether it's this world that will be restored or another world that will replace it, it must be prepared. And Christ said he goes to prepare a place for us, right? And we imitate Christ. Everything we do, we are the imago Dei, right? So in imitating Christ, we also prepare a place within our hearts, within our homes, our families, our kids. And that is a work worth doing.
A couple years ago on the Poetic Knowledge panel, David Hicks told a story about something with his family that, well, it's his story, but at the end of it, he said something that the reason he had hope in this situation was because there was gratitude. That gratitude seems to be this thing in the heart, in the soul, that the Holy Spirit can kind of sneak in, grab hold of, and win us over. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what the prodigal son has experienced, right? He's remembering what there's a gratitude for what he had with his father that he makes him capable or willing to go back. And there's a psalm that excuse me, there's a verse in the Psalms that seems to put forth that idea that Hicks was arguing, that gratitude is a means by which we can be saved. I don't know what that means here, but there's another story that I heard recently about St. Gregory the Great, St. Anthony the Great. So he lives in the desert by himself, and an angel appears to him and says, or he's talking to this angel that appears to him out in the desert, and St. Anthony asks him, this is kind of a weird question, I think, but St. Anthony asks him, who's the greatest of the Christians, of the saints? Which seems like a weird thing for a saint to ask. Like, I'm the greatest, right? So I don't know if that's how he meant it, but anyways, that's how I would have meant it, but I don't know how he meant it. But the angel says, well, there's this guy in Alexandria. And then St. Anthony's like, oh, really? Well, who's this guy? And so the angel sends St. Anthony to Alexandria to meet this cobbler. So St. Anthony gets to the cobbler's shop and he asks him, what do you do? And the cobbler says, I make shoes. And he says, yeah, but what do you do that, like, what are your practices for your Christianity? And he says, well, I make shoes, I sell them. I take a third of the money that I've earned and I live off of that. I take the other third and I give it to the poor. And I take the other third and I give it to the church. And St. Anthony says, that's not it, because I live in the desert by myself. I got rid of everything. So it can't be that. And then, so he keeps pushing him. And then the cobbler says, I don't know. I don't know. I just sit here in my shop. I make shoes. And when people walk past my shop, I pray, may I suffer that they might live. For every person that walks by. And St. Anthony says, that's it. That's the thing right there. That's what I'm missing. And I don't know, like, we'll just say the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Can we bleep that? Sorry. Maybe the world's going to crap. And
That was worse.
Do you want to try again? I don't know.
From the profane to the vulgar.
maybe the world is bleep. Maybe the world's bleep. I don't know. But I don't. What if we just keep doing what we're doing, and we're actually making the world a little bit better for the bad guys? But then the bad guys live in a world that's a little bit better, and they have gratitude for it. And then God sneaks in and saves them. I don't know.
As somebody who owns a retail shop and just stands there watching all the people walking by who are not walking in and feeling not grateful for them, that's kind of convicting. Okay, last question here before we let Dad finish out the conference with his closing thoughts. If you could only read 5 books for the rest of your life, what would they be?
Can we like be just given the Bible?
Yeah, okay, so you get
want
6
5
and
more?
one of them's the Bible. So
Yeah.
you want to,
Yeah. Okay.
let's just go down the line.
Heidi didn't want to
Genesis,
admit that she would
Exodus,
leave the
Leviticus.
Bible.
I would keep the
Let's
Bible.
go down the line.
but that
Wes,
only
you go
gives me
first.
4.
5 books.
Yeah.
Who goes first?
Wes.
Okay.
Thank you. I would read the Iliad, the Aeneid, Augustine's City of God, Dante's Divine Comedy, and the Brothers Karamazov.
Excellent.
Okay, I would do all of those books, but I think instead of, did you say Divine Comedy? You did. The Brothers Karamazov. I think I would put in Chesterton's Orthodoxy.
To replace what? We've got rules
Sorry,
here.
I took out Dostoevsky because my wife knows Dostoevsky really well, and I'm assuming I'll be with her.
Strategy. Matt?
Iliad and Odyssey have to count separately?
Yeah.
For me, they're in one binding.
Okay.
They do. I just made that rule, so.
Okay.
Because for these people to imitate you, they would probably have to have them in two editions.
Okay.
We'll have to publish them together.
Iliad, Odyssey, Aeneid, complete works of Plato. I have that in one bound.
No, I accept that. As a bookseller, I accept that.
Complete works of Plato and Josh Gibbs articles on our website.
You just want to introduce some chaos, huh?
The Iliad, the Odyssey, the complete works of Shakespeare, The Great Divorce, and Book 7 of Harry Potter.
Why did you say
Homer.
Shakespeare like you were correcting me?
I mean, it's just because you said Plato, you said Shakespeare wrong, you pronounce it Plato.
All right, Deb. I don't know why I gave him the last word, but it turned out that way.
I'm still thinking, but Homer, of course.
That's two.
That's two
Two.
books.
Yeah, I'm aware. I know. I got it.
The Iliad and the Odyssey are a diptych. I refuse to rip the icons apart. It's one book. The complete works of Shakespeare are also one book. So why would the complete works of Homer not be?
But have you seen it? Like, because I own a complete works of Shakespeare, and then I own the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Okay, he can have it. Let's just move on.
Well, then we all get one more book.
If you didn't think of it in fight
Roman
for it,
Roads
your
publishes them
problem.
together. It's fine. It's official. Now we don't have to act like my 7-year-old anymore.
You can't take to this island what you don't fight for. Complete works of Shakespeare, Homer, the complete Greek tragedies.
The complete
So do
collected works of the Church Fathers, East and West.
The entire Library of Alexandria.
And the Cotton Library. The Cotton Library. I want that Beowulf.
Pre-fire.
I'm taking my Kindle account with
Well,
me.
back in '96, when I graduated from college, my mother gave me the Library of the Future on a disc. It had 1,750 books. So there you go.
How much
Take
time
it
did you
to the
spend
island.
reading that?
I had to print them. It took too long.
Do we have a printer on the island?
Yeah. Anyway, let's get through this.
All right.
I'm thinking about whether I would take the Aeneid, and I think I probably would. And at this point, my brain falls apart. I can't pick the fifth. I don't know.
You'd be happy just reading those things
I
over
would
and over.
grab among something by Dostoevsky. I probably, let's say Karamazov. Let's say that. Let's say I'd take that.
Okay.
That's my fifth.
Well, this is the panel. We will now.
Am I alone on this island?
I didn't say anything about an island. It was not like a.
What was it? What was it? What
It was
was
just 5 books for the rest of your life. I didn't say you're like destitute
that-
on
well,
an
see,
island
it
somewhere.
depends- It depends who I'm with, because I want to talk about my books with people.
Chesterton said on a marooned island he would take a book on boat building.
Yeah.
Smart. It's probably also smart for us to go ahead and wrap this panel up. So Dad will have the